everyone, and thank you for joining the inaugural APN Digital Summit. We have put this APN Digital Summit together to help our APN partner community to learn some of the AWS services that we feel our partners can make a strong impact to AWS customers. The services you will learn about today will enable you to transform your business and innovate on behalf of customers to better meet the business needs at a significantly lower cost. Feel free to attend as many sessions as you want. We have 20 sessions running over the course of 4 hours. Once you register for a session, listen in as we dive into the content. We will be sending out an email communication for each track with in-depth resources and trainings for you to continue your education within these service areas. We will also be sending you a survey link after the presentation. This gives you the opportunity to provide feedback so we can grow this series for our partner community. We also provide the opportunity for you to tell us what content and services you would like to learn more about so we can help shape the direction of this APN Digital Summit and what we host in the future. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First, the session is being recorded. We will send you the recording when this presentation is over, along with the additional information I just mentioned to help you continue to learn more about these services. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to ask them in the question window. We will do our best to answer all the questions as they come in, but if we don't, we will follow up in an email after. If you are having any audio issues, please try your computer's mic and speakers. This often fixes any problems that you may have. Thank you again for your time today. I hope you enjoy the sessions we have for you, and we look forward to hearing what you think. Now, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter.
Hello, my name is Alan DeLucia. I'm a business development manager for AWS Service Catalog. And today I'd like to go through some of the things that we're doing to enable self-service in the cloud. And we're enabling self-service for a few different personas, which I will go through in the presentation. All right, so AWS Service Catalog is here as an enablement tool for self-service. If you look at many organizations that are coming into AWS, and I'm not talking about those that are, the first wave or doing a POC, but as they really start to scale and get into an enterprise, you have a need on the left-hand side for, the organization. And by the organization, I mean like the Cloud Center of Excellency or the CISO's organization to build a mechanism to standardize, to put some controls in place, and to really govern the environment. On the other side of the equation, you have a whole bunch of developers. It could be, hundreds, it could be thousands of developers, and they see AWS as a way to increase their time to market, decrease their time to market, right? They want to go fast. They're an agile bunch, and they really want to have some autonomy. They don't want to reach out and open a ticket to IT every time they need a piece of infrastructure. They want to launch a stack. And AWS Service Catalog is that enabler, and it brings the two groups together. And let me show you how we do that. So if you look here at, basically all the icons in AWS, anything that, you can create in CloudFormation, you can use AWS Service Catalog for. You can kind of think of us as an extension, if you will, of CloudFormation. So let me go through some of the key features and benefits. And, these are also organized in the same way the first slide was, where on the left we have the organization, and they're looking to standardize. So how do we do that? Well, if you build out products in AWS Service Catalog, and you then share those products across your organization to your different lines of businesses or teams, departments, application groups, DevOps teams, however you split up your business, you can ensure that they're all consuming AWS services in the same way or in a very similar way. If you were talking about a EC2 product, for example, you could really limit what AMIs they're using, the security groups, subnets, things of that nature, and you can ensure that that is common across the board. Or you can make small nuances between the different groups, but still have the same base. And you can enforce that consistency and enforce that compliance. So with compliance, a lot of things, and I might jump ahead a little bit, is based on tags. And by utilizing Service Catalog, we can really enforce that those specific tags are in place, or that specific set of security groups, or S3 bucket policies, or you name your AWS resource. We can ensure that some of those options are set the way that they would need to be set to maintain compliance for whatever your particular, or in your case, the customer's line of business is. We have so many different regulations that we really need something to remove some of the options that would take them out of compliance. Next one down here, this is really big, and this is something that we see a lot in our federally regulated customers, or regulated in general, and that's the ability to limit access to the development community. And what we mean by this is, with the absence of something like Service Catalog, generally the developers would have access to a console, or they would be writing their own CloudFormation or Terraform or whatever they're using, and they would need to have access to the underlying services. So if they're creating EC2 or S3, they would need some level of IAM permissions in those two services to be able to create and to be able to provision. With Service Catalog, we kind of abstract that a bit. So a user could have access to Service Catalog as an end user. They can have access to a portfolio in Service Catalog that has products in it, which may be, from the prior example, in the S3 or EC2 space. And when they launch through Service Catalog utilizes its own set of permissions to enable that launch in the underlying products. So you have a layer of abstraction back, and we'll get a little bit deeper into that further into the presentation. Constraints, this is a neat way to take some of those portfolios and products that you've shared and make some small alterations to it. So I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you have a EC2 product where in production you may give a user, small, medium, and large instance types. But in their sandbox, you figure that the load is much less and you want to keep them in nano or micro instances to save you some money. So what you could do is you could apply a template constraint to the main product for that sandbox environment and just eliminate the, the small, mediums, and large, and just keep the smaller instances there, while maintaining all of the rest of that product. So you're not forced to create multiple products for multiple environments. Another constraint that we have is a notification constraint, and we'll get into that more in a bit. Enforcing tagging, there's a few different ways that you can enforce tagging with Service Catalog. The first is the default tag. Every product and every portfolio is tagged with their portfolio and product ID, and that's by default. That's in the background. You as the Service Catalog admin, you don't need to do anything to enable that. When you go back to a product that's launched by Service Catalog, so again, EC2 instance, you go in, you look at tags, you'll see 3 tags there: the portfolio ID, the product ID that launched it, and then the user that triggered that launch. So that's there by default. The next level of tagging is the mandatory immutable tags that you can assign to either the product itself or to the portfolio. So if you assign that tag to a portfolio, then all of the products in that portfolio and any future products put into that portfolio will inherit that tag. And this is important when you're trying to enforce budgeting. If you have a budget code or a department code or an application code that you need to have applied, or even an environment variable, this is dev, or this is production, or this is test, or security classification, that sort of thing. You can put that in again at the portfolio level or at the product level, and that will be added to any product that's created in the future. Now, this tag, the developer will see when they go to launch the product, but it's a value that's locked. They can't change it. It's immutable, and it's basically enforced. The next thing that we give the ability for is what we call a tag options library. So if you have options that you want to present to the development community, but you want to ensure that the syntax is correct. There are times when an uppercase versus a lowercase really matters, or having a space versus an underscore. You can take a lot of that guesswork out, and you can just give them 5 or 10, up to 25 tags that they can pick from on a list, and that gets tagged. And then, of course, there's always the ad hoc tags that they can add on at the end. We also enforce security groups. So for a particular application that may be web-facing or in a DMC, and you want to ensure that they don't pick the wrong security group, that's something that can be enforced as well. On the right side, what are we giving our developers? Well, we're giving them autonomy. And one of the big ways that we give them autonomy is by having the products that are provisioned, or the products that are presented rather, in Service Catalog are generally pre-approved or reviewed by the group on the left before they're given to the group on the right. So they know that anything in there is already a pre-approved pattern. It's using the right AMIs, the right security groups, things of that nature. And oftentimes we see our customers utilize change management, where they say, anything that comes through Service Catalog is going to be an approved pattern and wouldn't need a stringent change control. So that really helps a developer really get going and utilize AWS. Next one-stop shop. Larger organizations may have multiple Git repositories or S3 buckets, or multiple different places where code could be stored. By using Service Catalog, they log in. Based on the credentials that they use to log in, they are entitled to a certain set of portfolios, and it's presented to them in one spot. And they can do that through the API, they can do that through the command line, or they can do that through the console. So it really gives them the ability to choose, what method makes the most sense to them. Portfolio level IAM access allows us to have granularity. We could have 10 or 20 or 30, however many you would like, portfolios, and you could assign different groups to them. So Group A might see a different set of products than Group B, and maybe Group C sees A and B. So we can do that at the portfolio level with IAM permissions. And last on this slide is the ability to copy. If you have a customer that uses AWS Marketplace, you can take any of those products that are AMI based, and you can do a copy to Service Catalog. You'll see like a one-click button. You click on it, it'll import that AMI, it'll set it up, put it in Service Catalog, and then you can utilize some of our features and benefits to help manage and govern that environment. All right, so why would you use a Service Catalog? Well, one reason is you could use it for lifecycle control. So you may have multiple versions through the products that you create in Service Catalog, and they could be iterative in nature. You can have version 2, version 3, version 4, and as you add more features or more options, or you can update your AMIs, things of that nature, you can utilize Service Catalog to take those updates and to then propagate it down through all of their shared portfolios. And you can also use it to do things like migrating into production and things like that. Controlling provisioning from a cost perspective, is a big one. By utilizing the mandatory tags, you can automatically have products that are created in Service Catalog go into an AWS budget. So, once they're in a budget, then, you can manage it. You can see what your spend is. You can put limits in place. Kind of fast forwarding to one of the blog posts that's in this presentation is we have the ability to, to look at some of the products in Service Catalog and then take actions from a custom Lambda function, where if you cross a certain threshold, let's say 75% of your spend for the month, you can go out and take some options away. If you're looking at like EC2, you could take that large or extra large away and leave some smallers. And then if you have, a threshold at 100%, if that's been crossed, you could actually turn off some of the products. You can kind of valve it off. So that's a neat thing to do from a cost perspective. From a security perspective, there's a lot of things you can do with, data classification and, ensuring that people are not provisioning resources in the wrong networks, in the wrong subnets, or opening up the wrong security groups, things of that nature. And then governance. There's so many different facets of governance. One that comes to mind is license management. You may have a marketplace product and you have 15 licenses for a certain thing. You need to make sure that you don't launch the 16th one. Oh, a Service Catalog, you can ensure that. You can tag it, you can count it, and then you can basically shut it down, through a Lambda if you exceed it. So there's so many things you can do with governance, and the ability to tie that back to tags and to configuration is really important. Self-service portal, one-stop shop, and we'll get into this more as the presentation goes forward. There's many different ways we can present Service Catalog to an end user, and they can see it all in one place. Standardizing deployments, of course, we talked about that. Integration with ITSM tools. So we're going to have some slides further on that jump into this, but one of the things that we've seen with our customers in the last year or two is that many of them in the enterprise space utilize ITSM like ServiceNow, and they do all of their provisioning, whether it's ordering a pencil or a laptop or having the latest version of Office installed. They're going to do it through ITSM, and we wanted to extend ourselves into that space, which we've done with a few different vendors. And another is limiting access. I talked to so many customers, and one just last week where they were trying to control the environment. Their spend had gotten out of control, so they took away everybody's access, where they had to go through IT, and then that took away agility. So they said, we want to allow people to be self-sufficient, but we can't let them just go out and create whatever they like. And that's one of the things that we can do here with Service Catalog. All right, so here's a few different terms to note, and we kind of talked about them a little already, but just to get into a little more detail. A product is the artifact in Service Catalog that could be a single service. It could be an S3 bucket. It could be a Linux EC2 instance, or it could be a full 3-tier stack. It could be something that's kicking off a CI/CD pipeline. That's the product, and the products are then consolidated into a portfolio. You think of it like a folder. And the portfolios are where you're going to apply your user access. It's where you're going to apply your constraints. It's where you're going to, give access to the portfolio itself so that you can build out that granularity. Constraints, I know we talked about the template constraint, but we have the notification constraint, and that would allow you to align an SNS topic to, any provisioned product that's launched. So let's say, when a product gets launched, there's a group that needs to know, like an operations team or, a finance team, something of that nature. You can set that up by default, and you can put it on a per product basis. And then the last is the launch constraint. And really, that's not a constraint as much as it's an enabler. That's the IAM policy that's going to be used by Service Catalog to launch something on your behalf. And then the last one at the bottom right, from an end user's perspective, provision product, that's where you go to see, all of the things that you've created in Service Catalog. And in that window, you can terminate a product that you've created. You can launch an update. So let's say you're in version 2 and version 4 is out there. You can actually use the provision product screen to kick off that update. And this is also where you can go to get information about your resources, your IP address, your host name, your bucket policy, cluster types, anything like that. It's all going to stay in your provision product little applet. So Service Catalog is split into two different groups. On the left, you have the administration persona, which is it's a different IAM role altogether. So the administration is responsible for assigning users and groups, for setting up the accounts, adding the constraints, adding the tags that we talked about, building the portfolios, populating the portfolios, assigning those user accounts to the portfolios. And then, of course, they're also responsible for the CloudFormation templates themselves that are the basis of the products. So that's what the administrator is responsible for. On the right side, you've got end users, and again, they're their own IAM permission, and they have the ability to browse the resources, hey, what's available for me? When they select something, they have the ability to fill out the parameters that were exposed to them in CloudFormation, and then subsequently launch the products. And once that's done, then it goes into their provision product screen, and then they can take whatever actions they want to in the future on them. All right, so this is just a flow of what an administrator will do. So they would first build their template. They would author the template. They would upload it into an S3 bucket. It turns into a product. They create that product. They put in whatever parameters that they need to create a product, and then they will put it into a portfolio. And at that point, they'll try to determine which portfolios are aligned to which groups. So they will align the IAM policies to those products, or to those portfolios rather. Then they'll add the constraints, make sure the access is in place, the tags are in place, And that's pretty much it until they add the next product, where the end user browses products, selects versioning, configures all of the parameters, provisions, then Service Catalog would execute on their behalf. They would get the notifications, whether it's successful or there's some kind of an error. It would send those notifications back to the end user. All right, so I'm going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about the ITSM space. So when we first started out on our journey into ITSM, we looked at ServiceNow as being one of the largest ITSM providers out there. And we built a scoped application. The code is owned and developed by AWS. And this scoped application lives inside of a customer's ServiceNow environment. And that application sets up a synchronization job that pulls over everything from AWS Service Catalog. So anything that would have worked natively in Service Catalog, it just pulls it, replicates it into ServiceNow. It allows you to start building workflows around it. And this is some of the power of ServiceNow. Workflow could be something as simple as, a manager has to approve before I can provision a product, or maybe, my manager and somebody from like a change advisory board needs to approve, and it's going to go through that workflow. And sometimes, there are products that could only go online, in a certain window. So you could have time-based constraints in your workflow. You have an EC2 instance, can't go online until, Friday night, 10 p.m. You can do that in ServiceNow, and that's something that, that we didn't have natively. So it gives us that ability. And then from an auditability perspective, you take everything that you do in Service Catalog and it gets integrated with ServiceNow's configuration management database. So we set up a new class, the Service Catalog class, with all of the artifacts that you create, and it gets stored there. And you can see, who requested it, who approved it, what the timestamps were on those, approvals and requests, when it provisions. It all goes into a request record. Oftentimes it goes into a change record, like when a resource is created or terminated, a change record is created. And it allows the customer to get into those workflows and to try to wrap them into whatever their business process is and to create a kind of a cohesive environment. One of the neat things that we really tried to do when we built this connector is we didn't want to impose upon a customer's ITSM team to have deep knowledge of AWS, and the inverse as well. The AWS team likely is not going to have deep skills in ServiceNow. Some of the other orchestrators we had seen out in the market did require you to put in, things like JSON files to kick off CloudFormation right from ServiceNow, and we didn't want to do that. So the neat thing here is that you do all of your management in Service Catalog, just everything we talked about before. The connector picks it up, puts it in ServiceNow, and really the only thing on the ServiceNow admin, once the initial setup is done, is they just need to align their local ServiceNow groups, user groups, with the IAM groups on AWS. And once that alignment is done, then the users in that ServiceNow group can see everything that somebody that was logging into AWS in that IAM group would see. So it just kind of merges the two worlds. And the last thing here about licensing, and of course we always encourage our partners and customers to go and check with their ServiceNow account teams, but generally speaking, this connector itself does not require an additional license to be able to use it, like a orchestration license or things of that nature. But again, we encourage people to check with their account teams. So here's a flow, of how it works. So, users are coming in and they're abstracted into the ServiceNow environment. All of the AWS Service Catalog products will show up in the ServiceNow Service Catalog, whether you're in Portal View or in the ITSM view. And you can kind of live in that space, browse through the products, use the search capabilities of ServiceNow. The products and portfolios are stored locally from the browsing standpoint, so you have that high-speed interaction in ServiceNow. But when you actually are ready to order a product and you open it up and start, filling it out, putting it in your cart, then it kicks off an API call to AWS Service Catalog, pulls down the latest parameters, the latest configuration from Service Catalog. And that's when the Service Catalog user will then fill in the parameters when they get done. they hit order now, and that will go off and start kicking off that business flow, that set of approvers, and however the customer set that up. Once that flow is done, once all the fulfillment rules are complete, then it goes ahead and it kicks off the the AWS Service Catalog API call to build, and then those outputs will then come back, get fed back into ServiceNow, and then propagate themselves down into their configuration management database. So really, the end user experience, remember a couple slides ago, hasn't changed much. The end users are still browsing products, but now they're browsing it, through ServiceNow. They're still selecting, the product versions as if they were in Service Catalog. They're still filling out those parameters. They're still requesting a launch. They're still getting those outputs. We're just abstracting them away from Service Catalog. So not a lot changes here. And the way it works is we have two users that are set up. We have a synchronization user, and then we have what we call an end user. And a lot of this information, all of this information, can be found in one of the blog links that are in this presentation. That's publicly facing, and it takes you screen by screen, parameter by parameter, what you need to do to make this work. But basically, that synchronization user out of the box would synchronize with Service Catalog every 31 minutes. That's something that's fully configurable. You can make it a minute, you can make it an hour, whatever makes sense to you. And it'll go out and look for any changes to the Service Catalog environment. And if it finds a new version, or let's say you've deprecated a version, it'll make those changes in ServiceNow. The other is a ServiceNow user, and that's the role that you'll use, or the user that you'll use rather, when you go to select a product, when you start to fill out the product. But when you go to execute, when you actually go to provision at the end of that workflow, it'll then do an assume and pull in the right launch role to kick off that product, similar to what you would do in Service Catalog itself. The administrator doesn't really have anything different. They're still living in Service Catalog. And if you see, this is a duplicate to the slide we saw before. So on the Service Catalog side in AWS, nothing really changes. The only thing they need to do is they need to then add the users and groups into the right groups in ServiceNow, make sure they're associated with the IAM groups, and you're done. It's that simple. ServiceNow and Service Catalog are also a great way to orchestrate AWS Marketplace products. If you have your ServiceNow connector set up and you use that one-click copy that we talked about before, that product will show up in ServiceNow. As long as it's in the right portfolio, it'll show up, at the next replication interval. So this is a really powerful tool if you've got your customers, utilizing the AWS Marketplace. So just to finish off on ServiceNow, if there's anything and any questions that you might have, certainly feel free to reach out to us or to your customers' ServiceNow field team. They should all be aware of this, and they should all be, aware if they need help, how to get it. So switching gears, the next one down, as we got into our ITSM journey, we said that Cherwell is another big up-and-coming ITSM vendor. We're seeing more and more Cherwell in the environment. So we've been working with them, and just a week or so ago on 9/19, they publicly announced an integration between Cherwell and AWS. So on the provisioning side of the house, it's using AWS Service Catalog, and it's making those similar API calls to what we just talked about in ServiceNow, but they're also pulling in some data from AWS Cost Explorer and CloudWatch. So when things get approved in Cherwell, some of their templates are a bit more dynamic, then it kicks off those APIs and it provisions. It keeps an eye on CloudWatch to see that instance get built, and then using a Lambda function, it'll take some of those metrics and it'll then populate their CMDB. So slightly different spin than what ServiceNow did, but a very similar outcome. The other thing that Cherwell did, with their initial launch is the ability to auto-create incidents. So let's say you have a CloudWatch alarm set to a certain CPU threshold or drive space threshold, something of that nature. You can have it automatically create a ticket in Cherwell, based on that CloudWatch alarm. Similarly, going back to ServiceNow, one of our blog entries shows you how to set that up. It's not fully integrated into the connector, but it's pretty easy to add. So I encourage you, if you have a customer in ServiceNow and you want to auto ticketing, to go and check that out. So again, you see the slight nuances here between this and the slide back from ServiceNow. Users are still interfacing with Cherwell directly. Cherwell is talking to AWS via Service Catalog, but then it's also pulling from AWS Config and CloudWatch. So a user would browse and request a service. They would publish and procure the services, and then the operations piece then monitors those services. And then things are triggered and then pushed into either the incident management panel or the CMDB. So a fully engaged solution here. And then the last one that we've been working with, and another popular choice here, is BMC. And when you see BMC, you might think of Remedy or MyIT. What they've chosen to do is to build in their integration on their Helix platform. So the Helix platform has replaced, the Remedy and the MyIT, and it's come together as kind of a cohesive platform for request management. I know there's also a Helix Remedy for incident management. So if you have a customer that, is a BMC customer, you might want to talk to them and see, when they're looking to upgrade into the Helix platform and, kind of reach out to their field teams. This also was created by BMC, so it's created and owned by BMC, so their field team should be, very aware on how to set this up. But again, to whatever extent we can help, feel free to reach out to us in the business development side as well. So for any of you that may be familiar with Service Catalog, maybe you've looked at it a year or so ago, 2 years ago, and kind of have an idea of what we were all about. This slide just shows what we've done since last year's reInvent. So in less than a year, we've launched so many things, and these are the majors, right? There's a lot of minor things we've done as well. And I'm not going to go screen by screen, but I encourage you to kind of look at some of these things, and if you have any questions, reach out to us. But we're constantly adding new features, and one of the things that we take very seriously is the interaction with our partner teams and with our customers to see, what they are seeing out in the field, what could make the product better, what could we do to kind of expand that journey, because we're really here to kind of enable self-service and to enable customers, in their journey with AWS. So we've broken down self-service into 5 different parts, right? And we're trying to focus on developing all of our features going forward to kind of fit into these different pillars. So the first one, which we just covered in the last few slides, are ITSM. We've got ServiceNow, BMC, and Cherwell. We may be looking to add some more here next year, so kind of stay tuned to that. The next one over is developers. Obviously, they're our end user community for the most part. And, we covered a lot of things that could enable developers, but a few of the extra things that I wanted to call out was this year we've given the ability to launch Service Catalog products straight from CloudFormation. And the inverse of that is true as well. You can use CloudFormation to set up resources in Service Catalog. And the reason why you would do this is if you have a bunch of Service Catalog products that has already went through review, it's already went through your CCOE, it's already been signed off by the CISO organization, and you want to take a bunch of little Service Catalog products and kind of sew them together, another blog post that we have a link to, you could create a full app stack without needing to get that app stack approved as a single entity. If the parts are approved, generally speaking, the master template would be approved. And then we could also then utilize some of the other, hallmarks of Service Catalog, like the reduction of access, auto tagging, and things of that nature, so that a developer could be fully functional building, multi-tier stacks just on individual parts in Service Catalog. So that's one of the things we've created this year that we've seen a lot of interaction with our customers, and we've had a lot of feedback. The next one over, we put down data scientists because this is probably the most common use case. We do a lot of work with our data scientist community, especially creating EMR clusters. But really you can think of this as any group of individuals that have a strong need to utilize AWS and to develop an AWS that may not have a deep understanding of AWS. So they're consumers, they're deep consumers of the product. And what we try to do for this community is we try to kind of tailor that user experience in such a way that they can, they can utilize the self-service world. So if you take EMR, and if you've ever built one from the console, there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of different questions, cluster types, nodes, versioning, how you're going to interact with Hadoop that, the average data scientist may not understand. So we try to create a lot of t-shirt sizes, give them the ability to create, give them the ability to terminate, and then give them the ability to, kind of reach out and do some things with CloudWatch that may be important to them without needing to reach out, to IT and to open up a ticket. So we're constantly kind of developing in this space. I've got some use cases that we'll talk about in the next couple slides, but that's that one persona that, we have a lot of focus on. Operations, as we really kind of expand, our mission from provisioning into the operation space, what we're trying to do is we're trying to enable, that DevOps team to kind of have the ops aspect of it. So, if you create it, you support it. Let's say you've got 5 or 6 people on a team, and person A is on vacation, person B is trying to, to help support what person A created. Utilizing Service Catalog and some of the, the operations functions that we can do, we can allow that DevOps team to, to get into CloudWatch to create some custom metrics, to have some triggers that go out to, configure to Lambda. We can have this operations team, have the ability to create resources in CloudFormation that, sub teams could then consume. And we're constantly looking for, ways to kind of add to that. So stay tuned. There's a few things that that may be of interest to you in the operations space, as we kind of expand this journey. And the last that's been kind of a hot topic this year is onboarding. We've built out the landing zone, or the landing zone team has built their product on top of Service Catalog. So for any of you that might be familiar with Landing Zone 3.0, that is built on top of Service Catalog. We've created a kind of a getting started portfolio inside of Service Catalog. So if you were to log into Service Catalog today, right next to local portfolios and imported portfolios, you'll see this getting started portfolios. And in there, we have a bunch of products, and it's growing all the time. And I've lost count of how many's in there, but you've got some RDS, some EC2, some EMR, VPCs, and I know there's a few others that you can just grab it. You can say copy, you can highlight and say copy it right into your account and start using it minutes later. The templates that were created, obviously went through architecture review, and they're utilizing best practices. So it's a great starting point for, a lot of teams, customers, partners, to start using a product and, and know that, they were created with some, some best practice mindsets in mind, and they can then take that that set of templates and then kind of expand on it. And then last but not least, as we talked about, the ability to take those products and then create additional Service Catalog resources. So let's go through a couple of use cases. So we had a major financial services customer that had a very large organization that was utilizing EMR. And before Service Catalog, there were some concerns about security, because again, this group didn't understand the difference between security groups and subnets and things of that nature. And some of the options that they were picking, they were going back and creating clusters from base images, things of that nature. They wanted to make sure they kind of tightened that up, limited the choices, ensured that they were meeting budgetary requirements, because some of these clusters could get quite large and get quite expensive. So they wanted to make sure that they were kind of curated in what sizes that they could create, and that those resources were tagged in such a way that they go into budgets, by organization, by department, by budget code, so that they can kind of keep an eye on that. And they had a lot of internal processes, right? They had a lot of post-build requirements that they needed to implement, and they had a hard time doing that through the console. So they wanted to do that. They wanted to reduce the onboarding time by giving a self-service option to that community, as opposed to having them open a ticket and wait, or go out and try to do something themselves and potentially get stuck. And they also wanted to leverage ServiceNow because that was their mechanism for pretty much everything at their company. And they said, if we could build this and then display to them through ServiceNow, and we have the ability to approve, right? Because in the past, if you gave users access to EMR, they could just go out and create things. There was really no valving mechanism. There was no scheduling mechanism. So we were able to do this all through Service Catalog and ServiceNow. So that was a really successful story. Next one, and this is very common, right? So, customers want to enable their development community. They want them to be agile. They want them to be, hands-off. They want to ensure that there's compliance, security and consistency in mind. And this is really where we started, with Service Catalog, and we've kind of expanded from there. But we're constantly looking to, make updates and improvements in this space. Another one, and this is kind of a, slightly different nuance to it, and there's really two different approaches that I'll point out. And this is where a managed services provider, or a partner is in place with a customer. And there are times when, there's a project and they want to kind of, ring fence that environment and say, hey, we want to give you access to AWS, but we only want to give you access to create these things. Maybe it's a migration factory, for a data center move or something like that. We don't want to give this managed service provider, EC2 star. And by contrast, somebody that came from a managed service provider, often you don't want to give your customer full access to the environment because you have SLAs, and if they're in there making changes or rebooting things or altering things, it could have a negative impact to your SLA. So you could then give your customer the ability to go and and do things in AWS without getting into the things that might impact you. So it's kind of a neat way to to enforce consistency, compliance, and security, and segment that IAM a bit so that everybody kind of stays within their guardrails of what they should be responsible to do. So pricing and availability for Service Catalog, we're available in every region except GovCloud, and it's only $5 per month per portfolio. And the little caveat to that is it's only a billable portfolio when you put a user, a group, or a role into the portfolio. So it's only when it has somebody that has access to it that it's billable. And some of our customers will spend some time developing. Maybe they want to set up like a hub and spoke model where they're sharing out portfolios across the board, but they don't want to start getting billed for it until there's some kind of a go live date. All they need to do is just leave the users out of the portfolios, and as soon as they put them in, then it becomes chargeable. And the big one is there's no add-on cost whatsoever to anything you create with Service Catalog. It's just the $5 a month per portfolio. Whatever you create is, it's on its own. If you're interested in Service Catalog, I highly encourage you to take this quick lab that we put together. It's a 2-hour quick lab, and it'll take you through, how to create products, portfolios, assign access. A lot of the things that we talked about here, you can do hands-on in that quick lab, and we have a link here in the screen. It's only 1 credit. So again, I highly encourage anybody, if they are interested in Service Catalog, try this first. Kind of stay tuned. We do boot camps and things of that nature every once in a while as well. Here are some of our blogs, and this should be hot links in here. And it takes you through a lot of the things that we've talked about this year with ServiceNow, the chaining of products, automation between accounts. This is where we get into our hub and spoke model. And a lot of these blogs have code embedded in them. So I highly encourage you to go out and take a look at some of these blogs. It'll take you through a lot of the things we talked about today and some use cases that you might find applicable. Okay, thank you very much for attending the webinar, and we will now open up the floor for questions.